Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And we are excited today to bring back a guest that we had in not last series, but it was a series before that on creating new earth. And this is Pat Farenga. And we had on episode 118, go check it out. It was on homeschooling, unschooling, deschooling, and the reevaluation of learning with Pat Farenga. And Pat is a writer, he's a publisher, he's the co-author of this book, Teach Your Own with John Holt. And he's been an education activist who worked closely with the late author and teacher, John Holt. And we had a really fabulous conversation with him back in that series. And one of the things that came up when we did that whole series on creating new earth was the absolute importance of supporting our youth and the future generations. So that's what's caused us to kind of create this new series on supporting our sons and daughters and really looking at what are all the different ways that we can start to support them to really create something new. And one thing that we've come across a lot and that Tay and I actively have looked into has been around concept of homeschooling, unschooling, deschooling, and just really reevaluating our concept of even learning, education, all of this stuff. It's really flipped it upside down over the last probably year and a half. And so we thought we'd bring you back today to have a more in-depth discussion.
And you went to school for a really long time.
Yeah, this is me. I've done regular, I probably spent about almost 15 or 16 years of post-secondary school and university and med school and all of that stuff. So it's like it was a long haul. And I'm re-looking at all this because it's not that I'm saying that all of that was necessarily bad. There's a place for different pieces of it. But I just think there's so many other ways that we could do it that in the end of the day, I think could be so much more beneficial and probably a lot less time and more effective. And then I don't have to go back so much to kind of keep trying to get myself out of the box that I put myself in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Welcome, Pat.
Yeah. So welcome to the show, Pat.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So what I wanted to do was John Holt. So for people that aren't familiar, go and check out John Holt's work. I mean, grab this book, Teach Your Own, that Pat did with John Holt. And John Holt was probably one of the foremost advocates of unschooling and this concept. And so we talked about this with Pat back in episode 118, but I really wanted to break down some of the main philosophy and principles that John Holt talked about, because I feel like for people that are new to this and they don't totally understand, well, why would you want to do this? What's wrong with the main conventional system? Why would you even want to engage in something like unschooling or homeschooling or whatever we call it? I wanted to break down some of the philosophies so that we can have a bit of a discussion and you can unpack each of these principles a little bit more as far as what does that principle mean? How do we foster that within our children? And why did John Holt maybe think that we needed to do something different that the conventional system was maybe not supporting or maybe even creating disruption in? Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Pat, would you first be able to give our audience who perhaps hasn't listened to your previous episode as yet, just a bit of an overview on John Holt's method and ideas around supporting our children and how that was different from just the conventional school system?
Well, I think the main thing is John learned from his experience and then grew the ideas out of that. So I think that's called inductive reasoning, when you go from the specific to the general. And that has served, I mean, he was working with children. And and individual children meant a lot, but in school they're working with classes in groups and test scores that aggregate everything together, and John always felt that was the wrong direction to be going. It may have some use in some areas, technical areas and so on, but especially today when with our cell phone you could just say, hey, what's the square root of 42? And get the answer. It almost why do we need to learn trigonometry for 2 years or whatever it is? I mean, school hasn't caught up to the reality of our lives in many ways. And I mean, just look how we use computers in school. And so many of the major advances that we've had in computers have been from people who can do them in colleges. It's like in their garages or their homes, you know. So you know, the first thing is to stay focused on the person and what is actually going on. And I think that has always served, you know, John, and you know, knowing him personally, and then also knowing his book so well, you know, that seems to be the through line. You know, he's not deriving theory from theory, you know, like, which is very common in schools. You know, we take one abstraction, and sometimes that's necessary. Like, look, if you're trying to figure out gravity on Mars or something, you know, yeah, you need a lot of technical skills and stuff to do that. But again, like a lot of that now, artificial intelligence stuff, that puts it more in the hands of a common person, you know, but always focused on the individual and going from there, as opposed to you know, looking at the group and just trying to say, oh yeah, we have to create a workforce. Well, okay, but what does that mean? Because it seems that, you know, the way workforce has worked out in our lives is, and John points this out in I've forgotten that he even you know, was concerned about this, but I found a recording of his last public speech to about homeschooling. It was to an alternative school conference. And in it, he talks about, you know, labor. It was like, why is it that, you know, economists talk about labor as if it's like a flock of migratory birds that go to where the cheapest costs are all the time? Is, you know, that's a recipe for disaster for a country. You know, well, here we are, and China's running rampant. You know, and he actually cited China in that speech in 1985, saying they're going to, you know, because, you know, we're in this race to the bottom. And he was reading from The Economist, like the wages of all these countries. Yeah, so you know, inductive reasoning, first of all, like, you know, we don't start with theory, and it always has to come from an experience and a reality. You know, there was this author, George Dennison, wrote a book called The Lives of Children. So what George said is that what is missing in school, because he was working in an alternative school, what's missing is the reality of encounter. And he says, you know, when two kids or an adult and a child meet in the playground or in a park, or there's a reality of encounter where they have to deal with each other and listen to each other. Whereas in school, we got the Charlie Brown effect, where the teacher, you know, goes on, the kids nod, and everyone, you know, it's not a real encounter. It's more like kabuki or something, you know, where people are just going through a ritualized process to, you know, and we all say, okay, now you've all been educated. Let's move on. So I think that's a key thing, is that John doesn't come at it from an academic theoretical background. He's coming at it from the practical teacher background.
Yeah, I think that not a real encounter is really important, because I feel like that's not even just an education now. I feel like more and more it
Even the
feels,
socialization
yes.
aspect, we spoke about that. It's not really real socialization. It's you're surrounded by a lot of people, but it's not necessarily engagement with one another.
especially not nowadays. It's very different. But this is sort of the it'll be one of the points I think that we'll get to. So
Mhm.
maybe what we'll do is I want to
Mhm.
go through, I'm going to pass over one of the principles of John Holt's philosophy, and then if you can unpack it a little bit, and then how we support it, and why John felt that we needed to do something different because it either wasn't being supported in the conventional system, or not even just not supported, but maybe was actually being really dampened and put
Mhm.
out. So
Sure.
the first principle I wanted to talk about was trust in the child's innate ability to learn.
Hmm.
So let me pass it over to you, and then if you can unpack that for us and go through
Sure. I mean, John, you know, when he was writing in the 1960s, the theory was children were still blank slates when they were born, you know, and that, you know, therefore you had to create an environment and write on that slate. And what John realizes, like, they're not blank slates. And here's another metaphor that they say. Fire is a child's. I think there was a school called the Lamplighter School, and they had, like, you know, our job is to light the fire in a child's curiosity, and that's what this school will do. And John directly addressed that metaphor, saying, No, the fire is there the minute they're born. Our job is not to put the fire out. You know?
And that's so true. I feel like as parents, when we are really present and watch our children, that's undeniable that they come in with their own personalities, with their own gifts and abilities, with their own agendas. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's, I feel like every parent can relate to that for sure.
Well,
Absolutely.
and part of that too, Pat, this just happened just the other day. We have friends visiting Taya's mother right now. And this lady is probably in her 70s and was a principal and still is a principal of a school. And our kids are unschooled. They're here with us, and we do our own sort of program with them. And not really a
Not
program.
program.
No real
Live with
program.
them.
It's pretty open, and we're still learning as we go along. But what was interesting was she was doing some exercises with them because we have some stuff that they do and different things that they work on. And so she was doing some things with them. And then she was saying to Taya how important it was to make sure that you gave them positive
Praise,
reinforcement and praise and all of this stuff along with it.
rewards.
And it was just really interesting because maybe you can share what your response was to
Yeah,
her.
I mean, I studied psychology and philosophy when I was in university, and I got all of that. You know, I was paying attention to the the positive reinforcements and the conditioning and all of that. And I said, well, I feel like sure you can do that with animals, and that's been shown to be partly beneficial, but I feel like with children, when you start to praise them on a superficial level, when you don't necessarily feel like, oh,
Mhm.
that's so exciting, but it comes on as like you need to show them praise in order to encourage them to display another behavior again in
Mhm.
the future. I feel like when we do that as parents, what happens is that children start to look to an external authority for feeling like they're on the right path.
Yes.
Whereas if you actually pay very close attention, when a child starts to crawl, when a child takes their first, when a toddler takes
Mhm.
their first steps, when our girls started to recognize letters and then string them together to form words, to string them together to form sentences, there's this natural innate squeal,
Yeah.
enthusiasm, and just joy that radiates out of them that we
Mhm.
had nothing to do with. It's
Right.
their own innate enthusiasm to learn and to show up for life better equipped. So, having learned a skill or having figured something out in their own mind through their own experience,
Mhm.
that is the reward in itself. And
Mhm.
nothing or no one can actually dampen or lessen that if we allow that innate joy to inform the children. It comes
Mhm.
from within. And and so they're not moving forward, then they're not constantly within their life looking to an external authority to validate what know, how they learn,
Mhm.
because they've always had that inner self-reference to inform their inner compass has been strengthened as a result of
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Well, and,
Yeah.
and one thing I think that goes with that, and then I think it maybe ties in because this is sort of coming up for me now. It's like when they were, because I remember when my daughter first came out of bed, walked over with her hands on the bed,
As
and
a
then all of a
toddler.
sudden just kept on going. And when she first learned to walk, and there was a squeal of exhilaration,
Yes.
and I had to like
Mhm.
run to get her before she went down the stairs. But it was like there was that like, and I then what it did is it
Right.
sparked inside of me the same excitement for her organically
Right.
It's contagious.
rather than trying to create it. And I think
Right.
what happens is that, and I would like to hear your perspective on this. If you are put in a system where you're having to be
Mhm.
forced to learn certain things, then maybe the only way you can try to get those kids to get excited is to offer them
Colorful stickers.
colorful stickers or claps or something along those lines, because it's not there organically inside themselves as much to come up. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on all of that.
Well, yeah, they're very much in line with that. First of all, Teo, when you were talking about, praising, I mean, yeah, it's an honest reaction, like you said, Jason, when your daughter, walked. I mean, it's like, wow, that's great. I mean, those are honest reactions. But then we have this thing, and John, when he passed away, he was working on his last book called Learning All the Time. And his editor was able to take previously unpublished material and finish it. There's a whole chapter in there called Praise Junkies. And John talks about, how this effusive praise is a very bad idea, that this is a parenting technique that should go away. I mean, if it's an honest praise, like something different happened and everyone like, oh, of course that's good. But just because it's like, that's how education works. You're supposed to praise something. It's like, well, not every little thing, because then after a while, as you noted, Taya, they expect praise. And if they don't get it, they think they've done something wrong, or they have to do something even bigger to get praise. So, it warps the interior motivation that a child has to walk and to talk. And, and this is obvious. John made such a big deal about this in the 60s. Because like I said earlier, people still believe that, the children were blank slates, and Piaget was just starting to come out with these ideas that children construct knowledge from their experiences. And John was on the same wavelength, but coming at it from the classroom, from his point of view. And that's really key, is to enjoy your children and your time with your children, and not make it seem like, not turn it into a performance, where they have to perform for you. That's what a lot of it feels like in school. And that's a lot of reason why so much of, the stuff you learn in school is forgotten, because they're like lines in a play that you don't care about. It's like as soon as the run is over, you don't remember a word you said on that stage, and so we have to pay attention to the child before us, not the child that we want or think should be, or that we think that we could coax into becoming. I mean, yeah, that's our job as parents. And that's something that you said, is like, that I wanted to respond to, that you didn't do anything. You actually did do something. This is nothing to, this is what's important, I think, is you created the space for your child to have that experience, the time and the patience. It was not nothing. Many parents cannot do this. I mean, we talk about ADD among children, but ADD is exploding among adults, and us being more diagnosed. But also, like, for me, thing about ADD in the classroom, it's like, well, if you're bored, and gosh, I know I was awfully bored in the classroom a lot of the time. So, but then we turn it in on the child and on ourselves, instead of like saying, no, it's the situation. It's an unnatural situation to be learning in the classroom. Yes, we choose to do it at times. Certainly learning in groups has got its benefit, but there's way, way too much of it in our lives. Way too much of it.
I think a big part of the discussion that will become evident is that we really have to stop asking what's wrong with our children, and have to start to notice the things that are wrong with the system in which we pushed our children in.
Well, and a lot of times I think as parents, we can sometimes see this too, where, like I'll have this conversation with people. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, are they always like that? Is there different times where you find their personality changes, where their energy feels better, their mood's better, they're more focused, they're more able to concentrate? And a lot of times there are different situations that do come up like that. And they're just, so it's like you kind of see, well, that's important. Like how do we create more of those types of situations if that's what they're being called to, if that's what they're wanting, right?
But you're right, though, because oftentimes it creates a bit of a disruption for the family, for the parents. So if there's a 9 to 5 and both parents are needing to keep up with a work schedule, or even more, oftentimes longer than than the 9 to 5, and there's no one else there for support, it creates a bit of a dilemma for the parents on how to deal with it. And then that's where I feel like then medication comes in, because they're just trying to get by with the current schedule, not willing to make changes. And then it
Mhm.
just creates more and more issues down the line.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of that ends up happening. I think the next one then that I think ties in with when you were talking about even not a real encounter and is around learning through living. So,
Mhm. Yes.
what are your thoughts around that?
Well, it's kind of sad to me that here we are, we could talk about, as parents, like all the the wonderful things our children learned on their own when they were young, right? And I've actually had educators and very well educated parents, say back to me, well, that's fine when they're young, but that's not true after they turn 8 or 9. And and that sort of thinking kind of blows me away. It's just like, so you're born with this talent and it grows with you. I mean, and this is why John called it growing without schooling. Growth is a natural process. It won't stop until you die. you know and the idea that we need to add school to make us grow better is you know,
Pompous?
it's crazy. Yeah, it's pompous. That's a good way to put it. It's pompous. I mean, yeah, we want, institutions, we want places to learn and grow, but, must it be set up like a factory of learning where everyone is put into competition with one another? And it's gotten so bad now, that we have international ratings, oh, Finland is smarter than America in math and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's just crazy how we have a global competition for grades, and that's all artificial. You know, kids want to do things well that they want to do or that they think would be worth trying, and and that's it. I mean, school, like, you got to be good at everything. You're the Swiss Army knife. It's like, if you don't like something and it's not working for you in a homeschool situation or the good alternative school, they'll say, fine, what else you want to do? Maybe you need a break. You want to take a walk, you want to read a book. What's going on?
Because like what would happen now is like if you're not good with something, you kids automatically feel less than others, so it
Mhm.
hits their self-esteem. Or there's like a learning disability, it gets kind of diagnosed now, and then they need a special assistance to try to get that ability back online as best as they can.
Yeah. I mean, and this whole idea that, like, we have to, grade the children. That's why I did a podcast earlier this morning with a woman from England, and I remembered this from that speech that John, that I just posted this up on YouTube a couple of, maybe a week or two ago. It's the last speech that he gave to an alternative school group, and well, to anybody really, about homeschooling. And one of the things he pointed out was, what sense does it make to give children grades? I mean, a teacher will know who, a good teacher. Oh, we need to work on such and such with Pat. He doesn't do fractions very well. Oh, yeah, instead of like, oh, based on your test scores, you're not doing as well as Johnny or Susie. I mean, it's a completely different vibe right there as you're getting it. And what does it matter? Like, I think, John pointed this out either in a book or in that talk. We don't like look at a musician, at a composer's work or an author's work and say and grade all the books on an average or all the scores on an average and then say, there you go, you're an 88% composer. It's like, no, you get a lot of dogs in between the gold, right? I mean, you're an artist. And the same thing with the student, but we all think that, oh, given the average, and again, now we run into all that. What's the average learner? What does that mean? I mean, for schools, it means something on the standardized test scale. But is that really valuable? I mean, most of us, I mean, gosh, I've forgotten most of what I studied except the stuff that I use. you
Yeah.
know and we have to figure out, we know how to do this. Homeschooling shows us some ways. There have been schools and educators who've talked about this. This isn't an idea that's just unique to John. But what happened is John appeared at a time in our society when the whole world is just moving towards mass institutionalization of childhood, of just turning childhood into a managed experience. And and that is the problem, as John identified at that very small level. Once you try to manage a child's learning, you're actually limiting their opportunity to learn. Because now they're more concerned about what you think and what you're going to do and how they should act around you, instead of like, oh, why is that ant going that way? Let me watch.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we found too, John. I mean, you've homeschooled both your children who are well
Three.
into, oh,
Three.
three of
Yeah,
them.
three.
Okay. So three. So we didn't with our first one, and we are with our second and third one. And we're seeing the difference as well. The sparkle in their eyes, the joy in accomplishing something on their own or coming at something on their own is very evident in the homeschool children. And what we've seen too is that, when with regards to John Holt's learning through living and how children learn best by engaging in real world activities that interest them, we're seeing that with so much more clarity. And when they're ready for something and they are excited for something, that's when they learn best. And you're absolutely right. Like I barely remember anything from much of my schooling, especially throughout high school, because it's just not relevant. I remember I did really well in grade 9 math, and my teacher at that time said, you should take enriched next year because you're getting over 95. And I did. The following year, I applied to, and I got into the enriched level math. And I tell you, the teacher that I had there, I just couldn't understand the reason as to why we were putting those equations on the graph. And I would ask the teacher, and I think because he felt like we were an enriched level, he should leave us alone and not really give a whole lot of instruction. So it just baffled me, and I couldn't understand the rhyme and reason as to why we were doing what we were doing. And from
Right.
then on, I totally crashed in math. Like I barely passed because I didn't understand the relevance of what I was learning. And so I couldn't just memorize things for the sake of memorizing things. It would just drive me mad.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. In the United States, we have to take 3 years of a foreign language in high school. And then when you go to college, they usually ask for another year there, right? So I've had 4 years of Spanish, couldn't speak a word, but I passed all the tests. And then 2 years ago, a friend of mine invited me to spend a week at his condo. So I spent a week with him and his wife down in Mexico. And I said, I think I'd like to learn Spanish. And so, I started looking around at different programs, and I came, this one Duolingo was very highly rated. I tried it, and it was all full of reward. It was so schoolish. These little cartoons, and after everything, you got an award and stuff. And then what made me finally and I'd stopped using it pretty early. But then what really made me decide I've got to find a whole other method was I read an article and I think it was in Medium Digest online. But this woman was talking about how she was addicted to Duolingo. And she's been doing it just to get the rewards. She admits that she can't do the foreign language, but she's so entranced by the games. And I'm like, oh, goodness,
And
So,
this is how our reality has been set up, Pat. Like it's
yeah,
all like if we look around us, it's all this sort of reward punishment. Like we see this
right.
even with speeding, those signs that show an unhappy face if you go over the speed limit. Yeah.
Right. And so I discovered a program called Dreaming Spanish. I'm not getting paid for anything. But what I like about it is they just say, watch these videos. They have beginner, intermediate, advanced. Watch one video a day, 15 minutes or two, because some videos are only like 5 minutes long. But they have these very engaging actors speaking, doing little skits in Spanish, but they're skits about real things, like that like a teenager or an adult would want to do, like go to a cafe and order, or you're sitting down and meeting. Like there's one episode where they drive from Mexico to California to go shopping, and so they're showing the differences in Mexican shops in here, and then they did the same thing with restaurants and food. And the whole thing is you cannot turn on captions. They're completely disabled. They just force you to look at the situation and listen to the words,
Hmm.
just like a baby.
Mm.
Well, that's exactly.
And it it took me about three times through before I started to feel like this is working. You know,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, like, cause I just started, my ear was getting tuned to the rhythms and the sounds, and then I started to recognize words. It's like, so you know what, Neil, like, oh, this is the preposition, this is the verb to be. It's like, no, because that's not how kids learn languages, right? So it made sense to me, and I have to say, I mean, I'll see. I'm continuing with it. I'm going to go in March, so my goal is to just stick with this to March and see how much I could get. But I am really pleased and amazed that there are other ways of learning languages, and thank goodness this one came along. Because I know about immersion, but I don't feel like going to Mexico completely blank and spending all 30 days trying to learn Spanish.
Yeah, it's so true. It's like my daughter, the particularly our 8-year old, Taya's family's Persian, and so it was like all of a sudden at some point just from being in the environment, because what would happen is usually if say Taya wanted to say something to her mom that she didn't want Sophie to know, she'd speak in Persian,
Yes.
in Farsi, and then she wouldn't know, and then all of a sudden she started responding back, "I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I know what you just said."
Like,
And
shoot,
they were like,
can't do
"Okay, that
that
doesn't work
anymore."
anymore." But it was totally like that. It was like just you didn't even know it was happening, and then all of a sudden it was like all there, and that's just from that exact sort of experience like you're talking about.
And then it takes us right into the next one, curiosity over curriculum. So formalized curriculum often lead to disengagement and discourage deep learning.
What a
Yeah.
big one, because when teachers start up their year, they need to have
The
their
curriculum.
Oh,
curriculum totally
every day.
organized. So this is
Yeah.
gonna, a lot of teachers that are listening to this, it's gonna,
I'm sorry, it's going
it,
to ruffle your
yeah,
feathers.
and it has nothing to do with
No,
you as a teacher. It
no.
has to do with the system. That's
Yeah,
something I really want to get across is a
emphasize.
lot of
Yeah.
times there's amazing teachers, even trying to do really great work within a system. But
Mhm.
these are sort of the principles that we're sort of unpacking here and how we can do that. So yeah, curiosity over curriculum.
Right. Well, first of all, having a hidebound traditional teacher is not the end of the world if that's the person that you relate to for learning. I mean, some people want a tough teacher or someone who may not be as refined as Mary Poppins, but I mean, so you can have and also people, homeschoolers, unschoolers choose to go to school for classes, or apprenticeships. They choose to engage in these things. So it's not like we're saying teachers are not needed, adults aren't needed. No, the point is to let children see these skills being used and how they're used and why they're used, and then let them decide if they want to go deeper into it. And then if they do, sure, it'd be great if you're in a wilderness program, sure, you could use the forest and whatnot nearby. But if you want to study submarines or something and you live in the Midwest, well, yeah, you're probably going to need some special equipment and some extra help. But it's there. I mean, that's the beauty of today. In the one hand, the internet is an amazing teaching tool. On the other hand, it's an algorithmic nightmare because you're not deciding stuff; it's deciding stuff.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess part of it with the curriculum idea when it comes to curiosity is that if you've got a strict curriculum and you're needing to keep often like then in a conventional system, you've got 25 or 30 kids sometimes. So you're trying to keep them all within a certain, this is what we're learning now, then the next thing. There's not the room for the
Individual.
individuality to follow your own interests. You're kind
Right.
of on a path and you gotta stay on that course with everybody else. So
Mhm.
as much as I think this is just part of the challenges of that system. I imagine this is one of the reasons why John Holt was thinking you can't allow full curiosity and exploration of your interests if you're having to follow a structured curriculum.
Right. Yeah. And especially now today, as we said before we started recording, it's just like right after school, you start your after school programs that are all educationally oriented to make you do better in school. It's like there is no time. I mean, I hear this, educators say, I remember, I think it was John Gatto who pointed out that when he added up the amount of times that a kid, it takes to ride the bus, go to school and get home and then do homework. And there's maybe 2 or 3 hours that they have, if that. And that was back in the 90s. Nowadays, I don't think there's any time that's unaccounted for a child educationally. Like they're expected to be on task all the time. And that's just crazy. We know adults burn out from work schedules that do stuff like that to you. And I think that's also part of the problem is we adults have fallen into, oh yeah, I'll do a 60-hour week and only be paid 40 for 40 hours, because I want to show what a great, person I am. And it's just like, you're being taken advantage of.
And this is where we can then see, the rates of depression, the rates of anxiety going up, the rates of
Mhm.
digestive issues, skin problems, like that all ties into how we are living life on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So not only as adults, but when we see these symptoms within our children, it's a bit of a wake-up call to, well, how are we living our lives? How are we supporting one another? What sort of a routine do we have? Is it stress inducing, or are we fairly relaxed as a family? Like I feel like these symptoms even come up for us to look more closely at how we're conducting our lives.
Mhm.
And figure out where to make
Changes,
appropriate
necessary
changes.
changes.
Right. I know one of the things that I keep thinking about and trying to in trying to tease out because John gave me the direction to go in, but I mean he died in 1985. There's so much going on, but right now, like I mean, I remember reading about this several years ago in Britain. They called it the crisis of loneliness, and now it's here in America. They're saying that this is a real problem. Loneliness is really big, and people. And I'm thinking to myself, well, of course they're lonely because they don't know how to get out, how to socialize. I mean, the whole idea, when we reduce socialization to just going to school, that's like a mythology almost, because school is not, they cut recess here in the United States. I don't know about what it's like in Canada, but they needed more learning time. So a few states are now putting a half hour of playtime in, but forget it. You just barely have enough time to eat lunch before you go to your next class. And then adults feel the same way. So what do we do? Well, one thing, and this is where I think homeschooling has a lot to say, is like if you want to create a community, if you want to create a family, you need time. It just doesn't fall from space or out of some workshop you do. You have to put the time in, the FaceTime with your children and with your spouse and your significant others and figure out how to do that. But it seems like nowadays we want to just hire someone to do that for us, hire like a relationship specialist, a child care specialist. I mean, we can do it, and it's not, and we'd have the benefit of like, actually having friends instead of like these transactional friends that, yeah, they're friends, but they're getting paid to do stuff with your children and whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm happy to help someone learn magic and get paid for it or teach them the piano. But at the same time, I also do that for free because, some kid asked me, I will show them, But so I don't see teachers in schools, I think, really are just don't understand that they're not going to go out of business. It's just that their roles are going to shift. They're going to stop being the controller of the kids' time, and hopefully be a partner for it. And I mean, I would love to see schools become more community centers so that the elderly and other people, adults who are working from home, would go spend an hour there. I was talking about well, I won't get into that, but in the book, Instead of Education, John Holt wrote about all these other places, what would now be called third places. Besides home and work, there always used to be third places like bars and pubs and bowling alleys and places where people would gather. And this book with Roy Oldham, I think was his name, wrote this book in the 80s talking about the disappearance of third places, and that's going to lead to a loneliness issue. And sure enough, here we are in 2025. And like, yeah, if you can afford to go to certain cafes, or if they'll let you sit there for more than a half hour without having a cup of coffee, a second cup of coffee, I mean, the world has changed, but in order to create this, we have to be in the world. We have, the adults have to have the time to be with the kids. And since our system is set up to discourage that, it's people like you and I who voluntarily say, well, I'm going to disengage this much from the system, so it gives me this much more time to be with my children or to do what I need to do, because I don't want to watch TV. I'd much rather do these other things, So, that's important, for us to realize that we can actually manage this, but the world is not interested in us managing this. The world would much rather just sort us into algorithmically into different Zoom sessions and get on with our lives. So yeah, and again, this comes back to reality of encounter, right? George, he was a real smart guy. Yeah, this reality of encounter. We need more encounters, because so much of it is fake, I mean, this is wonderful. Our conversation is genuine and stuff, but still there's that unreality because you're 3,000 miles away from me. Mm-hmm. It's still a little off, but I'm sure our conversation would still be rich, but it would be different if we're sitting in the same room.
Yeah, it would definitely be another level to it for sure.
I know our first interview within this series with Peggy Hall, she has a large platform as well, and she was mentioning that so many people have reached out to her and said to her, Peggy, I can't spend too much time with my children. And she kept hearing that over and over again of parents expressing that directly to her. Like, I actually don't want to spend too much time with my children. I have to be honest. When I had given birth to my third, I felt like, oh my gosh, like I need time away. Like you need to go somewhere so that I can have a bit of alone time. And I really feel like that stems from a place of not having support within our families, especially within the Western societies. However, Peggy also said that, when as parents and families started to get into this homeschooling routine, after a few months or even after a few years, they reached back to her and touched base with her and said, I feel like our relationship is healing. Like my relationship with my children is healing because I got to spend more and more time with them. And the things that irritated me or frustrated me or I was short with them for, I feel like that's all healing. Our relationship is healing. And that's huge. And I can attest to that as well personally, that I feel like even, it's not to say that there's not yelling that goes on in the house and disagreements, but it's real. And it's like, we have discussions and some of it is heated. And I don't think a day goes by without one person in the household kind of losing it, but it's like we're there for each other. We're supporting each other through it. We have every meal we have together, and there's a lot of interaction and working through of emotions and quiet time and alone time and together time that happens, that is ultimately life. Like life is teaching us. And even as we are within the presence of each other, there is that healing aspect that's taking place.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well said. And the thing is, when parents say, I don't want to spend that much time with my children, it's because of all the other pressures in their lives. I'm sure, one of the things that I really enjoyed about homeschooling is like, for many years I had an office with employees, so I would go to work in the morning, and sometimes the kids would come with me. That was great. Running my own business, I had all my employees could bring their kids, and they did, and that made work easier because then the kids had playmates in the office, and we could get stuff done, have our meetings, whatnot. But the other thing is, like, just because your children are with you doesn't mean again, this is that education idea, that you have to be telling them and hectoring them or no, you can read a book. You can be on the phone with somebody else. they're just in the house or around, I mean, this is what, learning from life is also about. I mean, your children learn, like, how do you spend your free time? What do you do with your free time? What is free time? How does that work? Why can you take a nap, but they don't, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we can't poo-poo like these small things about life. I mean, they're very important. I mean, we're only now discovering like how we've polluted our food supply so badly. But when breastfeeding was considered not as good as the formula feeding, by the 80s, the Leche League, all that thing had changed. Slowly it's coming back where like seeing people breastfeed in public is not considered obscene in most quarters, but it still is in some. I mean, we still have a ways to go, these very natural processes. And the more that I think we publicly admit this and get it out, the better. Because to always act like everything is under control and all it's going to take is a professional to come in here and give us like the 3 magic words or the magic pill or whatever it is, and then all will be well. It's like, no, we have to take responsibility. I mean, it doesn't mean that we live on a mountainside by ourselves, not at all. But we have to accept that we're in control of our lives. We may not accept it, but we are. And if you don't accept it, you're going to be rolled, by other forces. And if that's how you want to live, okay. But I prefer to, try to direct my where I'm going to roll.
Well, and a lot of that even I think just comes back again to the real life encounters, the real experiences with everything. And even when you were talking about the loneliness, I feel like that's at the heart of so much of it because so much of what people spend their time with and engage in is not meaningful.
Right.
And so the loneliness, I mean, part of it I think is with loneliness with others, but a lot of it I don't even think necessarily has to do with just connection with others. It's like a deep internal sense of loneliness, I think,
Mm.
even with yourself, because you're just so much of your time is being spent in things that are
Distracted.
not ultimately filling you up. And
And where do we learn that? Right?
yeah,
Don't we get a full serving of that in
you
school
actually get
every day?
rewarded for it
Yeah, for
if
putting
you
up
put
with
your
it,
time
right?
in and do it.
If you're lucky, you might have 1 or 2 classes you look forward to, but all the rest, right? It's like,
Yeah. But you can see where it's sort of the system kind of creates that over and over again. And
hmm
when you were talking about that, the next one on the list was the importance of play,
hmm
right?
Well,
And
yeah, there's so much that could be said about that, and we've really neglected that with our kids. By saying that they don't need recess, they don't need gym, they need more textbook, more test prep. This is crazy. I mean, we know this. I mean, some of the most high-powered companies on earth, have these retreats where they play games and do stuff, because they understand that's how you create cooperation. That's how you build a team. You don't just put 30 kids in a classroom, give each of them a test, and say, okay, you got the highest grade, you got the lowest, blah 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 blah. Right? I mean, it's just we know better, and but we act, for especially around our children. No, 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 no. You must go through this gauntlet of school.
Almost like it's an initiation to
like a
something.
rites of passage to
Right.
something.
To get them used to being bossed around.
Yeah.
In deschooling society, Ivan Illich had a phrase. I'm paraphrasing it. He said it much more concisely than I will, but he said, having kids learn silently from an instructor in front and follow orders is pre-alienating them for office work.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been so much information out there too about the importance of play. There's an MD by the name of Stuart Brown, founder and president of the National Institute for Play, and he's also the author of a book called Play: How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. There's also another great book that we came across by Peter Gray,
Oh yeah,
Free to
free to learn.
Learn.
Yeah.
And I mean, we were just one paragraph
Excellent.
into the beginning of this book, and Jason and I were both in tears
Aw.
where his child, this is where he kind of spoke about, started to recognize that, what the importance of play was within children's lives. But
Mhm.
it was that first paragraph starts off with him describing a situation
His
where
9-year-old son, I think it was.
his 9-year-old son
Yeah.
exactly says, "Go to hell," because
Mhm.
he just basically is pushing away 7 big adults in the office that he's gotten called down to,
Mhm.
because he's being told that he needs to behave better within the school system. But
Right.
I really feel like we're going to be looking back at this period in our history, and if we haven't already, we will just be asking ourselves, how did I allow myself to go against every grain of instinct, that I should do something different with my children? Because I feel like on some level, whether we're an educator or whether a parent or a caregiver, when we are seeing what our children have been exposed to and enduring, all this time within our school system, but specifically so blatantly within these past 5 years,
Mhm.
we will really be questioning why we didn't follow our intuition more.
I think I couldn't agree more. And just to sort of wrap things up on that note, I was really surprised and pleased when I learned from Ivan Illich. He wrote about this, but it was in a conversation I had with him, and about education. And I said, part of the problem is that educators just feel that their job is to pull all this information to like turn children into something. Because of the word, the Latin word is educare, to draw forth. And Illich looked at me and he said, "Well, that's wrong. The word is educare." And I looked it up in the Oxford English Dictionary. He's absolutely right. The origin of the word education doesn't come from educare, to draw forth. It comes from the word educare, which means to nourish. And it was referring to nourishing from breast milk, from mother's milk. And that's where the draw forth comes from, And then let's amplify that by saying, if you can find statues of monks that have breasts, from the Middle Ages and earlier, because that's the milk of knowledge that you would gain from being in their presence and so on, So education's root is about nurturing. It's not about drawing forth. So if we would focus more on nurturing, yeah, we want to draw forth their talents, absolutely, and help them emerge on their own. We don't draw them forth so much as that the latter happens. So why don't we look at it? I mean, education views itself as separate from health, but it's not. Unhealthy children don't learn well. So yeah, you want to improve a child's test scores? Not that I think that How about just want to improve their life and their educational possibilities? Make them healthy. Give them good food. Give them good shelter. These are the basics.
I
But
was totally thinking the same thing that you were saying, Pat. It was as you're saying that around the root with education around nourish. I feel like it's exactly the same thing with health, and you got to nourish that natural ability to heal, which is there in everybody. And
yeah,
usually we just get all these blocks in the way of it, and it's getting those things out and just letting that take its run its course.
yeah, yeah.
All right, I think we're getting
Next
down
one.
here. Next one is respect for child's autonomy.
Wow. Well, that's a big one because people get all carried away with, I know alternative in the 80s, we got a lot of discussions with alternative schools. In fact, on the tape that of John Holt's last recorded speech about homeschooling, a question comes up from Jerry Mintz from the Santa Fe Community School about, is it better for children to learn in an uncoercive school than in an uncoercive home? And I mean, people were just so like parsing this word, but coercion I'm sorry, I had too many thoughts going in my head. What is the question again? It was specific, so I give her a specific answer.
Yeah, so it would be looking at the principle that John Holt talked about with respect for child's autonomy.
Yes,
So kind of around them having more control over their own learning journey, um,
right,
adults
right,
transitioning from more of a director to a
right,
facilitator.
right. Thank you. And so, yeah, and so, in the home environment, if your child has an interest in robots, and many kids do at some point, or cars or dolls. In my case with three daughters, it was dolls. you know, um, feed that, feed that interest as much as you can. It doesn't mean buying them a lot of stuff. It means talking to them about it. Sharing, listen to their stories. I know my kids would invite me to play with them. Play with them. That's and you'd be amazed. I mean, a lot of child psychologists, that's how they got their insights, was from playing with children. Watching children play. So we can do that too, and through that you can learn how to best help that child go in the direction that they want to go. Or maybe you realize they're going in a really bad direction. I need to turn them around somehow. And then how could I do that? And that's another discussion. But non-coerciveness does not mean that you don't say anything. It doesn't mean that you don't express your opinion or your dissatisfaction if they did something bad or hurt somebody, right? But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you have a right to tell them everything all the time what they should do. And another thing that we forget is that sometimes being helpful is being coercive. Where you say, "Oh, don't do it that way. Do it this way. Oh, don't touch that." We're so proscriptive. Or is it prescriptive? I get the word. Basically, we're always telling kids what they can't do instead of we should be telling them what they can do. Oh yeah, you can go out and play. You can do that instead of, oh well, don't go on the monkey bars and don't do this and don't do that. Now go out and play. you know.
And you know what's interesting, Pat, as you're mentioning that, I feel like that's a big part of the learning that even happens for parents when the
Mhm.
children are home and we're all learning together. The learning happens for the parents, and maybe this is where the frustration and irritability come up oftentimes, is because what is within the parents is made pretty clear within the interaction that happens between the parents and the children. So if the parents are over controlling or overbearing, or if there is something that, because kids are really great at this, at pulling forward what needs to be looked at, that
Mhm.
parents have
Yeah.
thus far done a good job in hiding behind or stuffing in their
Yeah.
closet and not looking at.
And they're not all that scared to like put it right in your face sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you just said this.
Well, how come you can
Oh,
say
they
that and
love
I
pointing out the
can't?
hypocrisy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of have a lot of oh shit moments where you're like,
That's right.
all right, I did that again.
And a sense of humor.
You
Sense
got
of humor is
you
vital.
have to. You
Yeah.
really have to be able
Yeah.
to laugh at yourself and
Mhm.
also own up when they call
Yeah.
you on something. Otherwise they
Reflect on
know
it. Yeah.
and then you
Well,
lose
that's how
that.
you teach them to own up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not a one-way street here.
Yeah. Yeah. The reasons of because I told you so really
Yeah.
doesn't fly very well for
Not
very long.
anymore. It
Not
might
anymore,
have.
especially. Maybe back in the day when you would have got spanked if you didn't, but that's a whole different thing.
That's right.
And really just creates a lot of repression, I think. But
Oh yeah.
this open kind of dialogue with it, I mean, as a parent, when you're going through it, sometimes you're like, it'll be frustrating, but
Maybe that's why people don't want to homeschool.
yeah, because you will have to work through a lot of you'll see a lot of your own programming and a lot of
Yeah.
your own stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like what a great
Right.
opportunity to clean some of that up for ourselves and then to show our
Mhm.
kids what it's like to actually take ownership for
How
our
to do
actions.
that. Absolutely, Jason. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next one on the list, Pat, is learning happens everywhere. I think we've kind of talked about that,
And
Yeah.
but
so,
how are we able to support that, in a home environment?
Well, informal learning. I mean, that's your home environment. If you're a couch potato and you watch TV, that's what your children are going to learn. You know, but if you like to cook, if you like to be outdoors, if you do things, you have healthy activities, hiking, whatever, regular exercise routines. Let your kids see that. Let them participate with you. In fact, I mean, as you know, young kids, they're just going to participate with you no matter what. They're going to lay down on the floor and try the exercises. So, let's work with that. Let's not fight it, And then, like you said, sometimes, they call us out. It makes us go, yeah, maybe I should change that or figure out a better way to do stuff. I mean, we really do need to learn from, this idea, but we get this idea that, especially because of all the pressure in school to go to college, that like everything's a preparation to go to college. And then once you graduate college, you're completely done with your education because now you start work. And work is completely different than education. And it's not. It's not. So, but we've made education such a big part of our lives. And instead of realizing we learn all the time, we learn everywhere, not just in school. So let's knock school off the pedestal and say, but education is a great idea. Where else can we learn in addition to school? Because school's always going to be there in one form or another. It makes sense to teach, like, if you got 10 or 20 kids in a neighborhood that want to learn something, all right, it makes sense to put them in a group like Boy Scouts do and all sorts of social groups, But again, it's only for a little bit of their lifetime, a little bit of the once a week. It's not like 8 hours a day, including commuting and then the homework. We have to, and that's this other thing about agency. Children, I mean, a lot of the reason, I think 3/4 of the children in a Gallup poll recently said, they're teenagers, said school feels like prison to them. This is 2025, yeah. And so this was just January 2nd, 2025. I read this in the New York Times. So that quote was in there, that statistic. And how's the education establishment dealing with this in 2025? They have a great idea. Research shows that if you talk respectfully to children in a respectful tone, they're much more likely to do better in school than if you speak in a controlling tone.
Mind blowing.
Wow.
Wonder how much they had to pay for that.
Whoa! Be nice. Be like you would act towards another adult, right? A stranger. Unbelievable what passes for and this was a New York Times headline, like what breaking research.
Wow.
Yeah, that's funny. That's like something that John Gatto talked about too, I think, early on, about like even where this this sort of linear line of childhood kept getting extended.
Yeah.
Or before was sort of like, at a certain age, it was felt relatively early. The child was no longer a child. They were now, a young adult. And
Right.
even this term adolescence and all these things have sort of been put in to kind of
Oh
extend
yeah.
along this period. And he talked about the importance of speaking to, at a
Right.
certain age, you start to speak them to like you would an adult, and you talk to them regularly, no more like they're not a baby anymore.
Right. Right. There's a wonderful book called Huck's Raft by a professor named Stephen Mintz, Mintz. And in it, he talks about the invention of adolescence. He traces the growth of the development of American childhood, from the founding of the country to the late 70s. And he notes that adolescence was pretty much created by marketers in the early 1900s.
Yeah, it really is crazy when you start to go back and actually
History.
watch this stuff or look at where these things developed. It can't help but reshape how your perspective on all of it, because as the information comes in, you're like, well, that's kind of crazy. Because all you know is what you know, and until you start to dig around a little bit or learn, and this is what a lot of these guys did. Like John Gatto read so much information on all that stuff to just try to understand it himself, to
Right.
kind of make sense of it. And then you can't go back. When you start to see it, you sort of see like,
Right.
okay, so this isn't really about the child's best interest per se. Maybe there's something else that's tied into it.
Right. Right.
Right.
Well, one of the other things that John mentioned, I mean, it was based on economics, but he related it to schooling, which was Parkinson's law. It's sort of a humorous management book that came out in the late 50s. But Parkinson's law is very simply work expands to fill the time allotted for it. And so you had the original school day, which was 2 hours, and now it's like 16 hours. Yeah, and we keep getting more and more requirements. Things like Spanish. Yeah, it's like, yeah, foreign languages make sense if, the only reason I can understand why we do this in America is because colleges require it, not because schools are taking people out to meet people and speak Spanish, which would certainly be an improvement over just sitting in a classroom and repeating what the teacher says.
Yeah.
My favorite psych professor back at university would talk openly about how every single year he gets called into the dean's office at the university, and he gets questioned by him as to why his class tends to have the highest grades in the entire university. And he goes, consistently, my students end up getting A's. And he was questioned for that, and he said, well, and he was the most incredible professor. Like, he was engaging, he was interested in us, he asked for our feedback, he stayed behind and talked with us if we needed to ask him a question about class. He made the time, but he also, he said, I'm interested in their learning. I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in their learning. And he would give us mock pre-exam
Mm-hmm.
questions in the form of quizzes. And he said to us right at the beginning of the semester, he said, if you do these mock exams every single time I present them to you, you'll get straight A's throughout your exams. And he would bring to us the most important information that he wanted us to take away from his classes. And I remember so much from his classes because it was
Mm-hmm.
practical, relevant information.
Mm-hmm.
He taught us how to study. It was the only class that I went to in university where he actually took the time to teach us how to best study, where we could recall it much more efficiently. And it's his books that I have still held within my
Yeah.
library from, decades ago, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the information that he was bringing to us, he was absolutely enthusiastic about and passionate about. And
Mm-hmm.
that exuded from him and also was contagious in that, like, there would be times during his lectures when he would be talking about why we do the things we do or what the media knows, and as far as creating impressions and behaviors within the people who are perceiving the information. But I would just be enthralled and excited about what I was learning, and that's how I would retain the information.
Yeah.
It was through that level of enthusiasm,
Mm-hmm.
and not the repetitiveness. Like, I oftentimes observe my son who's in second year university, or think back to the times when we were going through exams, and it was like terrible. Like, it's really a form of torture. And it's like, what expectation do we have of our children when we feel like that's okay and we put them through that, and then expect to even judge them based on how they do under those torturous
Right.
circumstances?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like we face a lot of these tests and examinations and work after that. It's
Yeah,
like really one of the few times in your life where you're scrutinized so tightly.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
As we're coming down towards the end here, last two would be he was
Speaking of
critical,
which,
yeah, around this. I mean,
standardized
it's pretty
testing.
timely the way they roll into it, but critical of standardized testing. So
Uh-huh.
that's like the main measurement in conventional schooling. We uses grades and standardized testing. And gosh, I remember even back, like this still sits in my head. I remember back in grade three. Um, yeah, grade three, I think it was, or grade four. I had a teacher, and you would have a quiz, and then she would put all of the grades up on the board with your name beside it.
Oh,
So everybody knew where everybody stood on there. And if you weren't at the top of it and you were more down on the bottom,
good
you'd
old
feel
shaming.
pretty
Oh
crappy.
yeah. And that was
There's a
done purposely. Yeah.
Oh, and that's
Yeah.
still because I was one of the kids that was probably at the bottom of that at that point in time.
Uh-huh.
I didn't really figure out what I was, other than sports, what really I was genuinely excited about until well after high school. And then when I got excited about it, then everything came together because I knew what I needed to do and I was excited to learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a lot of like that still. I can still feel that discomfort, embarrassment, shame that could still be there early
Mhm.
on. You know,
Oh
it's
yeah.
and even if your names aren't there and you still see where you are in the range, those things grab at you. So I get why he would be critical of standardized testing. Outside of I just don't think that it necessarily is relevant. But it
Mhm.
gives us the idea that we need to reevaluate assessment. So
Oh yeah.
how are some other ways that we can look at doing that?
Well, performance assessments, can if you want to figure out if someone can do certain fractions, for instance, you can have them build a birdhouse or something, and they have to use a ruler, 4 3/4 and this, and cut things to the right dimension, or a dynamic assessment, where you have a deep conversation with them, or a performance like a play or a sports event, or a musical performance or dramatic. I mean, things that they do it, and then you talk about how they did it, how well or not, and so on. But yeah, and then of course, if you need to note it for some educational authority, you can note it. It doesn't have to be a grade. The only reason it's done that way is, as you pointed out earlier, so it's very easy for them to say, "Oh, he's the top and he's the bottom." It's got nothing to do with helping people. It's just like, okay, this makes it administratively easier because
Yeah.
now we know that here's the cutoff, and these 5 kids go on to the next class, and everybody else repeats. And it loses, like as was said at the very top, what John was looking at, the individual child. What's going to help this child, this person, to learn, and how can I help them? What do they want to learn? Because all learning's interconnected. You can learn to read from studying science, from nature, from sports. Same thing with math. You can learn sports from math. You can learn sports from board games. You can learn math from computer programming. It's all interconnected. I mean, I can't tell you how many homeschoolers learn math by doing cooking. you know,
Mm.
I mean, and yeah, following recipes, all that can lead into science and chemistry very easily. I know we had a very messy kitchen when we were kids being homeschooled.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
very good.
so this idea that one test and one subject tells you everything you need to know about that person, it's nonsense, and so we do have these other options, and others, alternative schools, I think it's a Waldorf school, because I'm not sure all Waldorf schools are run the same way, but this one, I think they said that every teacher writes down one sentence for every student that they taught that day about what their impression was about how it went. And then at the end of the school year, you've got something like 200 sentences or more, because you could do more than one sentence, but that was just the minimum. And that's so much richer. Then at the end of the day, look at this. Let's talk about, so you have like a diary of your experiences with this child, and you could talk to the parents and the child about this. That's a document. I mean, if you want to, yeah, if we're, see, I don't understand why we want to keep all these records, right? I mean, why do we keep someone's first grade records and stuff like that? I mean, and then we go back, and so many people who did poorly in school, like Thomas Edison, turn out to be people who really contribute to society. And then you get people like who become super billionaires and do nothing but steal from society.
And they're still doing it.
Even though they have tons and tons of degrees and names, and their name is on school buildings.
Uh,
And who better to do that than the parents? I mean, we truly know our children best.
Mhm.
And whether you're choosing an alternative school, or my son was also in Waldorf for the first 3 years, and that's before they became regulated. So we had such an awesome special experience there, because the teachers were truly free in being able to meet the children and offer them what
Yes.
they felt like was needed on that particular day, which has changed substantially since they became regulated. But for the most part, our days are like that. It's like, however which day the day presents itself, that will shape the way in which we do certain activities with the kids, or stay home and, partake in cooking and baking
Yeah.
and that sort of thing with the children, which, like you said, is in itself a learning opportunity, because, just measuring or taking this particular herb and that particular herb, and then they'll start asking questions. What is this one good for again? Oh, this is good and has positive attributes and beneficial for this and this and this. Like, these are all learning opportunities, and these experiences allow you to get to know your children better, yourself better, your own traits and abilities better. And
Mhm.
yeah, so it takes us to the final one here with parental role as supporters, not controllers.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, yeah, we have more experience of the world than our children, so we know how to protect them, right? That's fine, but you also have to give them the freedom to grow on their own and figure out, where they fit in the family and where they fit in this, and the way that that's happened, throughout history is just parents figure it out. And actually, it'd be better if we were a little more sort, because there used to be more of a village and more community. I mean, your neighbors, if you gave birth, your neighbors would come into the house and help. It still happens, thank goodness. But it's become, I mean, you give birth in hospitals, most people now. It's a different, the community feeling is missing there in a lot of ways. And that's what bothers me, like when I see things about the online community for such and such, or the school community. It's like, right, it's only a community when you're online, it's only a community when you're in school. I mean, a real community comes to your house and feeds you when you're sick, hold your hand when your parents die or something. But so yeah, we got to be real careful about like these phony communities. But I mean, they're helpful, but they're very limited, and creating our own, and having, again, coming back to that phrase, reality of experience. Same thing with your, just you and your child. There's that experience. How am I going to react to this? And again, going back to something earlier, we were talking about loneliness. Getting more involved with people. I mean, your kid's best friend, if they're in school, will probably likely be someone their own age. But you never know in homeschooling. It could be an older kid, it could be a younger kid, it could be another adult, it could be a teenager, because multi-age mixing happens, and some alternative schools that happens, although many of them are arranged, the way conventional school is by age. But in a homeschool situation, you go to the park, for park day, if your kid is interested in radio controlled airplanes, he's going to be with the older kids over there, regardless of his age, and that's okay. That's how it works. Not like, oh, this is only for fourth graders. You're too young to know this.
Mhm. Yeah, and the thing with digital communities, it goes both ways. It's one of those things where it can be really beneficial. And some people that really don't have access to communities,
Oh
that's a
yeah.
great resource for you.
Mhm.
And I think to me, it's like, it's options and moderation and context, and what are you being kind of drawn to, and what's working, what's supporting you. And I
Yeah.
think whenever we can actually do stuff with real people in real time, I mean, you can't
Mhm.
really beat that when you get the opportunity to. And then there's other people who just might not only be able to handle so much of that. Everybody's kind of got their
Oh yeah.
range on where they
Oh yeah.
are. So feel it out for yourself, but know that we got all these different options available to us now too.
That's
But I
right.
think what happens is there's just been such a push towards everything digital that we're almost, the pendulum swung too far onto the one side, where now we're missing real
Mhm.
engagement with people.
That's right.
Pat, that was great. I think that was really wonderful going through all of those things. And I think that gives people really good perspective of when we're talking about things like homeschooling or unschooling or deschooling.
Mhm.
These are some of the big principles that we are looking at. One thing I'd love to get your feedback that we're asking all of our guests is, how do you define success? And
Hmm.
has that maybe changed for you over the years, both for yourself, or if we were looking at, for children, what would be your benchmark kind of for how you define success or look for?
Well, as I think about it, it's certainly success for me when I was younger was what my parents wanted, which was to have a very successful, well, actually they wanted to become a funeral director and go in the family business. But I was the first Farenga since 1897 not to go in the family business. That caused quite an uproar in the family. And yeah, I would have been more successful monetarily had I gone into the funeral business for sure. But what I've learned is success is following what makes you not so much happy, but feel fulfilled. I mean, being happy is important, but there's more to life than just being happy and being fulfilled. I have good friends. My family's, is good. Life is feels good. I mean, I don't think it's like, oh yeah, I've got to change the education system. I've got to become like president of the United States or something. Those markers of success for me. I mean, again, when I was a kid, I probably thought that way. But as I got older, and particularly in middle age, as I got sick and other people died and stuff, I realized, having your health, having your friends and family nearby, that's success. It's not, so what if I die and I leave $1 million to my alma mater? I mean, maybe success for the alma mater, but I'm not sure, that's going to, fill me with a lot. But for some people it is. But to me, success is again a more intimate thing. I don't think I have to be like Donald Trump and have a statue with my name everywhere to be considered a success.
Nice. Pat, where can people learn more about the work that you are doing? And also, you had mentioned earlier the John Holt's last speech from 1985. I'll make sure I have a link in that as
Oh,
well
good.
in the show notes so that people can actually go and listen to him because it really is, I think, really nice to listen to some of these people that are no longer here. And especially, I mean, thank you for being able to pull that together and be able to put that up on YouTube. But where can people learn more about your work?
They can find my website, www.johnholtgws.com. GWS stands for Growing Without Schooling. And I'm on Facebook. The Holt GWS page is there, and also another page I run called Alternatives to School, and on LinkedIn as well. So, and who knows, maybe, not maybe, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be going to the Substack in the near future.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea. I'll have all of those links in the show notes so that people know how to get a hold of you. And as we mentioned, Tana had mentioned before, at the end of this series, we're going to compile a bit of a list of resources for people that are interested in this. That'll just be like a downloadable ebook or something. So we'll have some of those links like that in there for the different speakers as well.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah.
Thank
You
you
are
so
welcome.
much,
Thanks so
Pat.
much, Pat.
I enjoyed this conversation a lot. Thanks so much.
Likewise.